In 2018, America pulled off something that was once thought impossible. The country surpassed both Saudi Arabia and Russia to become the world's largest oil producer. By 2019, daily output had blown past 12.3 million barrels, shattering every expert prediction. That number kept climbing to 13.2 million barrels in 2024. And in the first quarter of 2025, production hit yet another record high at 13.5 million barrels per day. Even after enduring the chaos of 2020 when oil prices actually went negative, American production just kept growing. But here's what really doesn't make sense. Over the past decade, production has exploded by 128%, while the number of drilling rigs has dropped by 70%. In just 10 years, America went from being an energy-dependent nation reliant on imports to an oil powerhouse that left both Russia and Saudi Arabia in the dust. For the first time since the 1940s, the United States became a net exporter of oil. Today, America plays a dual role as both the world's largest producer and largest consumer, wielding far greater leverage in global trade and no longer at the mercy of OPEC's whims. Yet here's the contradiction. Despite producing more than it consumes, America remains the world's second largest oil importer. And there's something even more critical happening right now. In April 2025, when Trump's tariff war pushed oil prices below $60 a barrel, some shale companies found themselves on the brink of bankruptcy. At the same time, OPEC decided to boost daily production by 41,000 barrels starting in May. That's triple what they originally planned, and it's aimed straight at American shale oil's weak spot. Oil is a finite resource. At the current extraction rate, the reserves to production ratio sits at just 10.56 years. Production growth has plummeted from 630,000 barrels per day in 2024 to just 300,000 barrels per day in 2025. The growth is slowing down. Forecasts predict output will peak in 2027 before beginning its decline. So we need to answer three questions. How did America become the largest oil producer in history? Why does it still need to import massive amounts of oil? And how long can the current production levels last? Back in 2008, America was producing just 5 million barrels of oil per day using 1,600 drilling rigs. Fast forward to 2025 and daily production has jumped to 13.5 million barrels, with only 500 rigs. It's like a restaurant cutting 2/3 of its kitchen staff while somehow cranking out several times more dishes. Two technological breakthroughs made this possible. First up is horizontal drilling. Traditional drilling was like using a straw to sip water from the bottom of a bottle. You drill straight down and can only reach that tiny spot at the bottom of the well. But shale oil isn't sitting in some underground pool. It's scattered across vast rock layers. Vertical drilling is like poking a sponge with a needle. You only hit one point. Horizontal drilling changed the whole game. The drill bit goes straight down several thousand meters, and then when it hits the shale layer, it makes a 90-degree turn and drills horizontally for another 3,000 to 6,000 meters. Think of it like laying that straw flat and spreading it out. The contact area suddenly multiplies by 10, maybe even 20 times. But having a pathway isn't enough. Shale rock is incredibly dense, and the oil is trapped in tiny pores with no way out. Even if you drill a well, the oil won't flow. That's where hydraulic fracturing comes in. Put simply, you pump high-pressure water mixed with sand and chemicals down into the well. The pressure blasts thousands of cracks into the rock, and the sand props those cracks open so they don't close back up. The oil can then flow through those cracks and out of the ground. A single well can be fractured 20 to 50 times, essentially creating dozens of oil outlets. When you combine these two technologies, the impact is enormous. In 2008, a well produced an average of 300 barrels per day. By 2024, that number had hit 1,200 barrels. That's a four-fold increase. And oil companies took it even further. They started drilling 10, 20, sometimes 30 wells in tight clusters on the same plot of land, all sharing the same rigs, equipment, and pipelines. It's like a factory assembly line. Efficiency skyrockets and costs plummet. The cost per well dropped from $8 million in 2014 to $5 million in 2020. Drilling time got compressed from 35 days down to just 10 days. One drilling rig today does the work of 3 rigs back in. So there's your answer. Rig count dropped from 1,600 to 500, yet production soared from 5 million barrels to 13.5 million barrels. It's not magic. Technology made every single rig and every single well exponentially more efficient. But here's the key point. Shale oil only became viable because the cost came down. Back in 2008, extracting a barrel of shale oil cost $80 to $100. You could only make money if oil prices went above that threshold. By 2025, the cost had dropped to $35 to $40 per barrel, roughly on par with conventional oil. What does that mean? It means as long as oil prices stay above $40, American shale oil can compete. OPEC countries in the Middle East extract oil for just $10 to $15 per barrel. But through technological breakthroughs, America compressed its costs down to a level where it could actually compete in the market. That's the core logic behind how America transformed from an energy weakling into the world's #1. A technology-driven cost revolution turned resources that were once out of reach into something that could be extracted at massive scale. But while technology solved the extraction efficiency problem, it created a whole different kind of trouble. America produces 13.5 million barrels of oil every day. It only consumes about 12 million barrels. In theory, that should be more than enough. But in reality, America exports over 4 million barrels per day while simultaneously importing more than 6 million barrels. This isn't some kind of mistake. It's because oil isn't all the same. Crude oil gets divided into 2 main categories based on density and impurities. Light sweet crude is the premium stuff. Low density, fewer impurities, easier to refine, and more expensive. American shale oil falls into this category. Heavy sour crude is the rough around the edges version. High density, high sulfur content, complex refining process, and cheaper. That's what you get from Saudi Arabia, Mexico, and Venezuela. The problem lies with America's refineries. American refineries were built in the 20th century, back when the United States primarily imported heavy crude from Saudi Arabia and Mexico. So the refineries got loaded up with complex equipment designed specifically to handle that dirty oil. Now all this shale oil, this clean oil, is suddenly flooding the market, and the refineries can't process it. Build new refineries? That's tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars and a 5 to 10 year construction timeline. And here's the real kicker. Nobody knows how long the shale boom is going to last. What if you build it and then shale production starts dropping? Or electric vehicles go mainstream? Those billions would be completely wasted. So oil companies came up with a clever workaround. Sell the shale oil abroad and buy heavy crude to bring in. And there's a profit angle to this whole operation. Light shale oil sells for about $75 a barrel on the market. Heavy crude costs around $68 per barrel. Selling shale oil and buying heavy crude creates a $7 spread. In 2024, America exported over 4 million barrels per day on average. That price difference alone generates over $10 billion a year. More importantly, refining heavy crude may be a complex process, but it actually creates higher profit margins. Even though light crude costs less to refine, the market price already reflects that advantage. You buy cheap raw materials, use a complex process to refine them, and sell the products for more money. Meanwhile, existing refineries keep running at full capacity, preserving hundreds of thousands of jobs. There's also a geopolitical calculation at play. America imports over 60% of its heavy crude from Canada and 15% from Mexico. Locking import sources into North America reduces dependence on the Middle East. At the same time, exporting shale oil to Europe helps the European Union break free from its dependence on Russian energy. So this whole operation isn't a contradiction. It's a carefully designed business model. Export the expensive stuff, import the cheap stuff, profit from the spread, keep the refining process domestic to capture the processing fees, and preserve jobs and tax revenue in the process. But this model rests on one crucial assumption. shale oil production has to keep growing, or at least stay stable. If production starts dropping, export capacity weakens, and the entire model needs to be restructured. Which brings us to the third question. How much longer can production keep rising? Shale oil has one fatal characteristic: it declines fast. Traditional oil fields are like a steady faucet. This year it flows 100 gallons, next year maybe 90 gallons, and it can produce steadily for 20 or 30 years. But shale wells are like fireworks. The first burst is the brightest, then it dims rapidly. Just how fast are we talking? A shale well that starts at 1,000 barrels per day will drop to 300 barrels in the first year, fall to 150 barrels in the second year, and be down to just 80 barrels by the third year. By year 4, it's basically worthless, producing only a few dozen barrels per day. What does that mean? You have to keep drilling new wells non-stop. Let's say a company is currently producing 1 million barrels per day. To maintain that level of production, it needs to drill hundreds or even thousands of new wells every year to make up for the decline in old wells. It's like running on a treadmill. The speed is set, and you have to keep running. If you stop, you're going to fall. This model has one advantage: fast return on investment. Because initial production is so high, you can recoup your investment in 2 to 3 years. But the downside is equally obvious. You can't stop. Once oil prices drop below the break-even point, you're stuck in a dilemma. Drilling new wells loses money, but not drilling causes production to collapse. We saw this play out in April 2025. Trump's tariff war pushed oil prices below $60 per barrel. Many companies have break-even points between $55 and $60. Within a week, industry executives were taking to social media saying the government better come up with a plan or half the companies are going under. Now there's an even more serious problem. The best resources are almost tapped out. Shale oil extraction follows a pattern. 20% of the premium blocks contribute 80% of the production. These sweet spot areas have high oil content, great fracturing results, and low costs. The top-tier resources in major production areas like the Permian Basin in Texas and the Bakken in North Dakota are running out. The remaining resources are lower quality. That means lower production per well, higher costs, and tougher profit margins. Goldman Sachs issued a warning in its 2024 report. The Permian Basin is entering a mature phase, and geological conditions are getting increasingly difficult. The numbers are already telling the story. In 2023, U.S. production increased by 1 million barrels per day. In 2024, it only increased by 630,000 barrels. For 2025, the forecast is just 300,000 barrels. Growth has dropped 70%, and costs are rising. Between 2022 and 2024, drilling costs went up 10%, worker wages increased 12%, and steel, cement, and chemicals all got more expensive. In 2025, Trump's tariff policies drove up the price of drilling pipe and other materials by another. Then look at what the capital markets are doing. In 2023, Exxon Mobil spent $59.5 billion to acquire Pioneer Natural Resources. Chevron spent $53 billion to acquire Hess. These are the biggest oil and gas mergers in 20. What do these mergers tell us? The giants no longer believe the story about production continuing to surge. The logic now is to cut costs through mergers, maximize profits before production peaks, and distribute them to shareholders. Over the past 5 years, the number of publicly traded U.S. oil companies has dropped from 65 to 41. Smaller companies either got acquired or went bankrupt. What are the surviving giants doing? Consolidating resources, improving efficiency, and preparing for winter. The forecast from the U.S. Energy Information Administration is even more blunt. Production will peak at 14 million barrels per day in 2027, then begin its decline. By 2050, production will fall back to 11.3 million barrels per day. The reserves to production ratio is only 10.56 years. Sure, that number doesn't account for all the reserves that could be extracted through fracturing, but it reveals one simple fact: resources are finite, and they're being consumed rapidly. And there are 3 swords hanging overhead right now. OPEC is fighting back. In April 2025, OPEC Plus decided to increase daily production by 401,000 barrels, starting in May. That's triple the original plan. Saudi Arabia's extraction cost is only $10 per barrel. American shale oil costs $40 to $60 per barrel. Saudi Arabia's strategy is straightforward. Boost production to push oil prices down to $50 or $55, force American shale companies into losses, make them cut production or go bankrupt, and then reclaim market share. Renewable energy is replacing oil. Over the past decade, solar and wind energy costs have dropped more than 80%. In China, electric vehicle penetration surpassed 40% in 2020. The European Union plans for 100% of new cars to be zero emission by 2020. The International Energy Agency predicts global oil demand will peak around 2020. And policy is making things worse. Trump keeps talking about increasing oil production while simultaneously pushing tariff policies that raise costs and suppress oil prices. Shale companies are caught in the middle with nowhere to turn. Every signal is pointing in the same direction. The growth cycle is over. The industry is entering a contraction phase. How did America become the largest oil producer in history? Through a technology-driven breakthrough. Horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing compressed shale oil extraction costs from $80 per barrel down to $35, turning resources that were once out of reach into something that could be extracted at massive scale. Rig counts dropped, but the efficiency of every rig and every well multiplied several times over. That's the secret behind America's production explosion. Why does America still import massive amounts of oil? Because the light crude America produces and the heavy crude its refineries can process are two different things. Retrofitting refineries costs billions of dollars and takes years, and nobody knows how long shale oil production will last. So the smartest move is to sell expensive light crude, buy cheaper heavy crude, and profit from the spread in processing fees. Keep the refining process domestic, and you keep the jobs and tax revenue too. How long can current production levels last? The answer is simple: not much longer. Shale wells decline too fast. Companies have to keep drilling new wells just to maintain production. The best sweet spot resources are running dry, and what's left costs more to extract with lower yields. The reserves to production ratio is only 10.6 years, and production growth has already dropped 70%. The U.S. Energy Information Administration predicts a peak in 2027 followed by decline. Those $60 billion mergers are sending a message. The giants aren't betting on growth anymore. They're switching to maximizing profits before production peaks. OPEC's production increase is sending a message too. They've spotted America's weakness and are preparing to use a price war to reclaim market share. That 70% drop in growth is sending a message as well. Supply constraints are showing up and technology's gains are hitting their limits. The shale revolution gave America energy independence and shattered OPEC's monopoly. But it was also a high-stakes gamble. A bet that technology could keep driving costs down, that resources could hold out, and that the transition to new energy sources would happen before the oil fields ran dry. Now this 15-year party is winding down. The music is still playing, but it's not nearly as loud as it used to be.